The desert breaks the weak and forges the strong. In its vast silence, some find death, others discover who they truly are. Only those who lose everything can learn what truly matters. The sun blazed mercilessly over the Wyoming Badlands as Margaret Wilson stumbled through the endless sea of sand and sagebrush. Her torn calico dress, once blue as a summer sky, now hung in tatters around her bloodied legs. 4 days had passed since Jack Morris and his gang had left her for dead after raiding Old Henry's trading post in Golden Valley. The memory of their cruel laughter still echoed in her ears as she pressed forward, driven by nothing but stubborn will. Margaret's cracked lips moved in silent prayer as she dragged herself toward a lone yucca plant rising from the desert floor like a twisted sentinel. Her water had run out 2 days ago, and the relentless sun had burned her fair skin to a painful crimson. Every step sent waves of agony through her blistered feet, but she refused to surrender to the desert's hunger. Behind her, the wind erased her footprints, as if she had never existed at all. The world began to blur at the edges as Margaret's strength finally failed her. She collapsed beside the yucca, its sharp spines catching at her hair like grasping fingers. The vast emptiness stretched endlessly in every direction, offering no hope of rescue or redemption. Her father's voice seemed to whisper on the hot wind, telling her to be strong, to never give up. But even his memory felt distant now, fading like everything else in this pitiless land. As consciousness slipped away, Margaret thought of her mother's gentle hands and the small cabin in Montana that had once been home. The desert heat pressed down like a suffocating blanket, and she wondered if this was how her story would end, alone and forgotten in the wasteland. Above her, a solitary hawk circled in the cloudless sky, its cry the only sound in the terrible silence. The unforgiving wilderness showed no mercy to those who didn't know its secrets. Through the haze of near death, Margaret felt cool water touch her parched lips. She opened her eyes to see a weathered face framed by long black braids, dark eyes filled with concern rather than hostility. The Shoshone warrior knelt beside her, offering precious water from his leather flask. His calloused hands were gentle as he supported her head, speaking words in his native tongue that sounded like a mountain stream. Though she couldn't understand his language, his gestures spoke of compassion in a land that had shown her none. Nagwana studied the white woman's fevered face and knew death walked close beside her. He had been tracking elk when he found her collapsed beneath the thorny shrub, more spirit than flesh. Against the wisdom of his elders who warned against helping the white settlers, something in her determined eyes reminded him of his own sister, lost to the cavalry raids. He offered her pemmican from his pouch, watching as she struggled to chew the dried meat, her body fighting to accept nourishment after days of starvation. With careful strength, Nagwana lifted Margaret in his arms and carried her through hidden paths known only to his people. The secret refuge lay nestled between towering canyon walls where a cool stream bubbled up from deep springs. Here, ancient pictographs told stories of his ancestors, and the red rocks provided shelter from both sun and enemies. He laid her on soft buffalo robes, building a small fire that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls while she drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams. For 3 days, Nagwana tended to Margaret with the patience of one who understood the desert's harsh lessons. He brewed healing tea from desert roots, applied cooling mud to her sunburned skin, and shared warmth from his fire during the cold desert nights. Slowly, she began to understand his careful gestures, how to read the wind for water, which plants offered sustenance, and where to find shade when the sun grew merciless. As her strength returned, so did her hope, nurtured by this unexpected guardian angel. Margaret was grinding corn when Nagwana suddenly stiffened, his hand moving instinctively to his knife. On the distant horizon, a dust cloud rose like smoke against the azure sky. Through the shimmering heat waves, she could make out the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers, their brass buttons catching the sunlight like warning signals. Nagwana's face hardened with ancient pain as he watched the approaching riders. These were the men who had scattered his people like leaves before a winter storm, driving families from ancestral lands into barren reservations. Without a word, Nagwana grasped Margaret's hand and led her to a narrow crack between the canyon walls, barely wide enough for their bodies. They pressed themselves deep into the stone crevice, hearts pounding as the sound of hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. Through the gap, Margaret could see the soldiers methodically searching every hiding place, their faces grim with determination. The lieutenant's voice carried clearly in the desert air as he ordered his men to flush out any remaining Shoshone from their traditional hunting grounds. Hidden in their stone prison, Nagwana's whispered words painted a tragic picture of his scattered tribe. Half had been forced onto the Wind River Reservation, living on government rations and broken promises. The rest, like him, had fled to the mountains, becoming ghosts in their own homeland. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he spoke of children torn from their mothers, of sacred burial grounds trampled by cavalry horses. Margaret felt her own suffering pale beside the weight of his people's tragedy, understanding now why trust came so hard to him. When they finally emerged from hiding, their sanctuary lay in ruins. Scattered belongings littered the ground. The fire pit was trampled into dust, and deep hoofprints scarred the sacred earth like wounds. Margaret expected rage or despair, but Nagwana's face showed only quiet acceptance. With methodical care, he gathered what supplies remained salvageable, his movements speaking of a lifetime spent fleeing and rebuilding. As he shouldered his pack and turned westward, toward the distant mountains, Margaret realized their refuge had become just another memory lost to the relentless march of change. High in the rocky cliffs beside the Snake River, Nagwana led Margaret to a hidden camp where smoke from cooking fires disappeared into the wind like prayers. A dozen weathered faces turned toward them with suspicious eyes. "Why do you bring the white woman here?" asked an elder in Shoshone. Nagwana replied firmly, "She has suffered as we have suffered. The desert tested her spirit and found it strong." Margaret stood quietly, understanding their wariness. These people had learned that white faces often brought death and broken promises. An old woman with silver braids stepped forward, studying Margaret with eyes like polished obsidian. "I am Ayana," she said in careful English. "You are far from your people, white girl." Margaret met her gaze steadily. "My people abandoned me to die. Nagwana saved my life." The healer's weathered hand touched Margaret's sun-scarred cheek. "The desert marks all who survive it. You may stay, but you must earn your place among us." Margaret nodded, understanding that trust here was not given freely but forged through shared hardship and proven worth. Days passed as Margaret worked tirelessly to prove herself worthy of the tribe's acceptance. She tended fires that must never die out, helped the women tan buffalo hides, and learned to weave baskets from river reeds. Her hands grew strong and calloused, her movements more purposeful. When a child fell ill with fever, she stayed awake 3 nights helping Ayana brew healing teas. "You have gentle hands," the old healer observed, "but I see fire in your heart too." "Good. This world needs both kindness and strength to survive." One evening, as stars emerged over the canyon walls, Ayana presented Margaret with a beaded necklace bearing the symbol of an eagle. "The white world called you worthless," she said, her voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "But I see the spirit of those who never surrender burning within you." For the first time since her ordeal began, Margaret wept, not from pain or fear, but from overwhelming relief at finally finding a place where she belonged. Under Nagwana's proud gaze, she had discovered not just sanctuary, but a new identity forged in the crucible of the wilderness. As autumn painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, Margaret had found peace in the rhythm of tribal life. She was grinding acorns with the other women when Running Bear burst into camp, his horse lathered with sweat. "Riders approach from the east," he gasped in Shoshone. 4, maybe 5 armed men. They asked questions about a white woman in every settlement. Margaret's blood turned cold as ice. The wooden pestle slipped from her trembling fingers. "Jack Morris," she whispered, the name tasting like poison on her tongue. The camp erupted into controlled urgency as word spread of the approaching danger. Nagwana knelt beside Margaret, his weathered hand covering hers. "Tell me about this, Morris," he said quietly. Margaret's voice shook as she described the brutal gang leader who had destroyed her life. "He won't stop until he finds me. I've brought death to your people." But Nagwana's eyes burned with fierce determination. "You brought yourself to us for healing. Now we protect what is ours. Morris will not take you from this place." Chief White Elk called the warriors together as shadows lengthened across the canyon floor. "We have fought cavalry and outlaws before," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of countless battles. But this time, we fight not just for our land, but for one who has earned her place among us. Margaret felt the old terror clawing at her chest, but alongside it rose something new, a steel-hard resolve forged in desert fire. She was no longer the helpless girl who had begged for mercy at the trading post. As the camp prepared for potential siege, Margaret helped cache supplies and ready hiding places for the children and elders. Ayanna pressed a sharp skinning knife into her hands. "Fear is a luxury we cannot afford," the old healer said firmly. "You survived the desert's test. Now you must survive man's cruelty." Margaret gripped the knife's bone handle, feeling its familiar weight. When Nagwana returned from setting sentries, his eyes met hers across the firelight. "He cannot take what the desert has already claimed," he promised, his words solid as the granite peaks surrounding them. Dawn mist still clung to the canyon walls when Jack Morris rode into the camp with 4 armed men at his back. His scarred face split into a cruel grin as he spotted Margaret among the Shoshone warriors. "Well, well, little Margaret Wilson," he called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You've been keeping interesting company. But playtime's over, girl. You're coming back with us where you belong." His cold eyes swept over the assembled tribe with obvious contempt. "These savages can't protect you from what's rightfully mine." Margaret stepped forward from behind Nagwana's protective stance, her chin raised defiantly. "I'm not your property, Morris," she declared, her voice carrying clearly across the canyon. "I was never yours to claim." Morris laughed harshly, his hand resting on his gun butt. "You cost me plenty when you disappeared, girl. That trading post job went south because of you. Now you owe me compensation." But Margaret stood her ground, the knife Ayanna had given her hidden in the folds of her buckskin dress. "The only thing I owe you is justice for what you did." The tension snapped like a dry branch when Morris spurred his horse forward, reaching for Margaret's arm. Instantly, Shoshone warriors rose from concealed positions among the rocks, arrows nocked and ready. "You made a mistake coming here," Nagwana said quietly, his bow drawn taut. Morris's men found themselves surrounded, caught in carefully laid traps that turned their superior firepower useless. "This is our land, white man. Here, we make the rules." The canyon erupted in a flurry of arrows and desperate gunshots as Morris's gang fought to escape the closing trap. When the dust settled, Jack Morris lay groaning beside the stream, his right arm twisted at an unnatural angle and blood seeping from a deep gash across his forehead. 2 of his men had fled in panic, while the others nursed wounds from Shoshone arrows. Margaret knelt beside her tormentor, seeing him broken and helpless for the first time. "I could let them finish you," she said quietly. "But I'm not like you, Morris. I choose mercy." As the gang limped away into the desert, she knew this victory was only temporary. Men like Morris didn't learn from defeat. They just got angrier. Spring brought disturbing news with the melting snows. A weathered trapper named Old Pete stumbled into camp, his eyes haunted with fresh terror. "Morris ain't finished," he gasped, accepting water from Ayanna's gentle hands. "He's got himself a whole army now. Deserters, claim jumpers, men with nothing left to lose. They've blocked the trade route to Fort Laramie, robbing every wagon train that passes." Margaret felt ice form in her stomach as Pete continued. "He's telling everyone he's building an empire, but I heard him ranting about some white woman who humiliated him. You're in his blood now, girl." The full scope of Morris's transformation became clear when Running Bear returned from scouting the lower valleys. "He has 20 men now," the young warrior reported grimly. "They've taken over the old mine works near Bitter Creek, turned it into a fortress. No law reaches that far into the Badlands." Chief White Elk's weathered face grew troubled. "This Morris has become more than a bandit. He leads the lawless now, growing stronger with each passing moon." Margaret stared into the fire, understanding that her mercy had allowed a monster to evolve into something far more dangerous. The attack on the Hendricks Ranch confirmed everyone's worst fears. Margaret and Nagwana arrived to find the family's cabin still smoldering, the survivors huddled together in shock. Young Sarah Hendricks pointed at the crude message carved into the gatepost with a trembling finger. "They left this for someone named Margaret," she whispered. The words burned into the wood like a brand. "Your friends will pay for your pride." Margaret's hands clenched into fists as she read her own death sentence. Morris wasn't just hunting her anymore, he was punishing anyone who might shelter her. That night, around the dying embers of the campfire, Margaret made her fateful decision. "I have to face him," she told Nagwana, who sat silent as stone beside her. "Every day I hide, more innocent people suffer because of me." Nagwana's dark eyes reflected the starlight above. "The desert taught you to survive," he said quietly. "But revenge is a different teacher, with harsher lessons." Margaret touched the eagle pendant at her throat, feeling its smooth weight. "This isn't about revenge anymore, old friend. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves." That's what the eagle does. It soars above the storm to watch over all below. Under cover of darkness, Margaret crept through the maze of abandoned mine shafts that surrounded Morris's stronghold. The acrid smell of gunpowder and unwashed men filled her nostrils as she deliberately allowed herself to be spotted by a sentry. "Well, I'll be damned," the guard called out, raising his rifle. "Boss, your little birds come home to roost." Within minutes, torches blazed throughout the camp as word spread of her arrival. Margaret stepped into the flickering light, her hands visible but her spirit unbroken. "I'm here, Morris," she called out clearly. "Let's finish this between us." Jack Morris emerged from his crude headquarters, his right arm still bound in a dirty sling from their last encounter. His scarred face twisted with savage pleasure as he saw Margaret standing alone in the circle of torchlight. "Brave little Margaret," he sneered, circling her like a predator. "Come to surrender at last? Smart girl. My boys are getting restless, and they've heard stories about you." Margaret's hand moved to the knife at her belt. "I came to end this, Morris. You can face me alone, or you can hide behind your army of cowards. Either way, your reign of terror stops tonight." The confrontation erupted when Morris lunged forward with his good arm, trying to grab Margaret by the throat. She twisted away, her blade flashing in the firelight as chaos exploded around them. From the darkness beyond the camp's perimeter, Nagwana and his warriors struck like ghosts, their war cries echoing off the canyon walls. Gunshots rang out as Morris's men found themselves fighting shadows that melted away before their bullets could find targets. "You brought friends to our dance, girl," Morris snarled, drawing his revolver despite his injured arm. Big mistake. In the heart of the battle, surrounded by burning wagons and shouting men, Margaret faced Morris one final time. His rage made him careless, his shots going wild as she used every lesson the desert had taught her about patience and precision. When he stumbled over a fallen timber, she struck not to kill, but to end the threat forever. Morris lay defeated, his gun arm useless, and his followers scattering into the night like rats from a sinking ship. "I could finish you now," Margaret said, standing over him with her knife drawn. "But I choose justice over vengeance. You'll answer for your crimes in a proper court, not in the darkness where you've always hidden." Winter returned to the canyon with a peace Margaret had never known before. The trading routes reopened as Morris's scattered gang melted away like spring snow, their leader bound for trial at Fort Laramie. Yet Margaret continued her vigilant patrols along the mountain trails, unable to shake the habits forged in hardship. The other women teased her gently about her restlessness. "The war is over, sister," laughed young Dove as she watched Margaret checking her weapons each morning. "Even eagles must rest their wings sometimes." But Margaret's eyes remained fixed on the horizon, watching for threats that might never come. The news arrived with a traveling merchant whose mule train brought salt and coffee to the isolated camp. "Jack Morris is dead," he announced matter-of-factly while Ayanna examined his goods. "Died in the Fort Laramie jail 3 weeks back. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak to nobody. Just wasted away like he was already a ghost." Margaret felt neither satisfaction nor relief at the words, only a strange emptiness where hatred had once burned. "Some men," Ayanna observed quietly, "choose to die rather than live without their demons." The old healer's wisdom cut deep, as it always did. That night, Margaret dreamed of her mother for the first time since the desert ordeal began. In the dream, gentle hands braided her hair, while a familiar voice hummed lullabies from childhood. She woke with tears on her cheeks but no pain in her heart, as if some long-festering wound had finally healed clean. Outside her lodge, snow fell in soft, silent curtains, covering the world in pristine white. "The earth forgets," Nagwana said when she told him of the dream. "Each snowfall erases the scars of yesterday and promises new beginnings." As dawn broke over the snow-covered canyon, Margaret stood at the edge of the cliff watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold and crimson. The past felt distant now, like stories told around winter fires, real but no longer capable of causing pain. Below her, the camp stirred to life with the comfortable sounds of family, children's laughter, women calling to each other, the crackle of cook fires being kindled. "You have found your place at last," Ayana said, joining her at the precipice. "The lost girl died in the desert. The woman who stands here now was born from that suffering." Margaret nodded, understanding that some transformations could only be forged in the crucible of absolute despair. Spring brought new purpose to Margaret's life as she and Nagwana began traveling between the scattered settlements of the territory. Their first mission came when the Morrison family lost their way in a blizzard near Devil's Pass. "We heard tell of a white woman who rides with the Shoshone," old Morrison gasped when they found his wagon buried in snowdrifts. "Folks said you help anyone in need, regardless of color or creed." Margaret smiled as she helped dig out their supplies. "The desert teaches us that all blood runs red, Mr. Morrison. Out here, we're all just trying to survive another day." Word of their deeds spread like wildfire across the territory. In saloons and trading posts, men spoke in hushed tones of the mysterious pair who appeared wherever justice was needed. "Some say she's an angel," whispered a bartender in Sweetwater. "Others claim she's a ghost seeking redemption." Margaret laughed when Nagwana repeated these stories around their campfire. "Let them talk," she said, adjusting the eagle pendant at her throat. "Legends have power, old friend. Sometimes fear of justice is more effective than justice itself." Her eyes sparkled with newfound confidence as she spoke. At a remote trading post, they encountered a family of German immigrants whose wagon had broken down, leaving them stranded and vulnerable to the approaching winter. "Bitte, we have no money," the father pleaded in broken English. "But our children, they are hungry." Margaret knelt beside the smallest girl, whose wide blue eyes reminded her of her own childhood fears. "Money can't buy what we're offering," she said gently. "Kindness is free, and so is the knowledge of safe passage." As they worked together to repair the wagon, she realized she had found her true calling. Under a canopy of endless stars, Nagwana presented Margaret with a special gift, an eagle feather blessed by the tribal elders. "This is for those who belong neither to earth nor sky," he explained solemnly, "but who choose to fly freely between both worlds." Margaret accepted the sacred token with trembling hands, understanding its significance. She was no longer the abandoned girl who had stumbled through the desert seeking salvation. She had become something new, a bridge between two worlds, a guardian of the lost and forgotten. "We'll keep riding," she promised, her voice carrying across the vast wilderness. "As long as there are people who need help finding their way home,